So thank you for joining us. For the sake of review, the first lecture we gave as an introduction to wisdom in general, we did focus on wisdom in the Torah, specifically around Tzipor Yosef, Joseph as the exemplar of wisdom in the Torah. And we really focused there on Egypt and the connection between Joseph and the wisdom of Egypt, which, as I pointed out, was one of the ancient centers of wisdom. We're going to talk more about that today as well. The second lecture, we focused on the book of Eov, on the book of Job, and that was focused on the wisdom of the East, which was another locus of wisdom in the ancient world. And this week we're going to be focusing on King Solomon and on Israelite wisdom and the connection that that has to the other two. That's going to be our topic this week. Also, for the sake of review, we've developed a theme over the past two lectures about the two realms of wisdom, the lower realm and the upper realm. The first week, we discussed how Joseph discovers at the very end of Sipur Yosef that there are two realms in which wisdom operates. The earthly realm, where Joseph is trying to act in the ways of wisdom, and he later discovers that there is an upper realm of divine wisdom, and he understands the interplay between the two. We followed that up last week in Eov, where we added to that theme and the suggestion in the book of Eov that the two are not related, that the wisdom above and the wisdom below are simply two different realms of wisdom. We must act in the earthly realm, and we have no access to the godly realm, and our attempts to assume that the godly realm is the same and operates by the same rules as the earthly realm is where we get into our theological problems, and Eov suggests that those are two separate realms that do not interact. That is not the only opinion, as we discussed last week. Wisdom, as opposed to revelation, has a wide range of thought on these topics because humans think differently on these topics. We are going to be dealing with the lower range this week. The wisdom we're going to be focusing on is the lower wisdom. That's what you have told us to do, to focus on the lower realm of wisdom. And we are going to begin today with a little bit of one passage from last week. And there were suggestions last week that I tried to enlarge my screen. So I'm going to try to do that because I know that was an issue last time. Let's hope it works. Somebody in the chat last time taught me how to do this. How's that? Is that better? Yes, was that better? Are you seeing the screen larger now? Okay, excellent. Okay. So this was the passage that we entered with last time. Elohim chokhmah lishlomo. God endowed Solomon with wisdom and discernment in great measure, with understanding as vast as the sands of the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East. That's what we talked about last time. The Bnei Kedem, the people of the East, and then all the wisdom of the Egyptians. That was our subject for the first lecture. So those are the two realms. And you see this passage breaks down. We have the wisdom of Egypt, the wisdom of the people of the East, and we have Solomonic wisdom, which is greater than all. We learn he was wiser than anybody else, and his fame spread among all the surrounding nations. So we're told that the wisdom that we have from Shlomo is the greatest of all wisdom, better than the other two, and then it is elaborated on. These are all selections from the book of Kings. You see here where we hear about the story of Solomon. Vaydaber shloshet alafim mashal. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. Of course, about trees, from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall, and he discoursed about beasts, birds, creeping things, and fishes. Envoys came from all peoples hear Solomon's wisdom sent by all the monarchs of the earth who had heard his wisdom. So here, Sefer Malachim, the book of Kings, gives us a little glimpse not only into the greatness of Solomon's wisdom, but also what it consists of. And I want to point out here an interesting distinction that we haven't made yet, but the book of Kings shows us. What is elaborated here as wisdom is actually something that we would more accurately call knowledge. I'm sitting here in my school office. I'm an educator. This is content knowledge. And this is the first thing that is talked about. We'll see Shlomo also has wisdom in the sense of discernment, but here we're talking about knowledge. And these are two different categories that fit in. If you want to understand the difference between the two, the British journalist Miles Kington had a wonderful expression that he came up with many years ago. He said that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So I think I can't think of a better way of expressing the difference between the two. We hear here about Shlomo's Solomon's Proverbs. We also talk about his songs. We're not going to focus on that today. That's not part of our lecture series. But the songs here we are talking about, our rabbis believe, are found in various biblical books. So if we take a look at Shir HaShirim Rabbah, the Midrash, which is playing off the passage that we just read, says Shlosha Sfarim Katav. Solomon wrote 3 books: Mishlei v'Kohelet, Shir HaShirim. He wrote Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. As I said, Song of Songs will not concern us in this lecture series. That's love poetry. We're talking about wisdom. The book of Ecclesiastes, I'm not going to focus on because we're going to talk about that next week. We are going to be focusing on the book of Proverbs. I did want to show you, though, this wonderful passage here that in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, we have this opinion, and many of you might be familiar with this. Rabbi Yonatan Amar, Rabbi Yonatan said that Solomon, wrote Song of Songs first, then Proverbs, then Ecclesiastes. Rabbi Yonatan derived it from the way of the world. When a person is young, he says words of song. Song of Songs is, as I said, love poetry. So when you're young, you are in love and you write love poetry. When he matures, he says words of Proverbs. Middle age is a time of wisdom. And when he grows old, he speaks of how the pleasures of the world are vanities, since the book of Ecclesiastes is really about how life is full of nonsense, meaninglessness. We'll be talking about that next week. Some of you can have a show of hands, might be familiar with this passage, this idea that these 3 books, a book of love stories, a book of Proverbs, and a book of sort of cynical meditations, correspond to these 3 periods of life in Solomon. What's interesting to me, though, is even though this is sort of the familiar part of this midrash, in the midrash, and I didn't have time, we don't have time today to go into all of this, there are actually many different opinions as to the order in which he wrote the books. And some say he wrote it in a very different order. The question is, why did this idea catch on, this succession from love poetry to Proverbs to cynicism? And even though there are other opinions which try to look at different psukim here and derive it from different psukim. And I think the reason is that it says here in the Midrash, Rabbi Yonatan miderech eretz. Rabbi Yonatan derived it from the way of the world. Rabbi Yonatan himself used the principle of wisdom. Instead of looking at the order of the psukim, instead of using pilpul, instead of using exegesis on the verses, Rabbi Yonatan resorted to wisdom itself in order to figure out what order Solomon wrote in. So you see here in the Midrash a recognition of the idea of wisdom, that human knowledge and our knowledge as we approach Torah is something that can come from our wisdom, our looking at the ways of the world and using that as a principle, as a way to figure things out. We understand how humans age, and therefore we can determine the order in which Solomon wrote his books. Uh, I want to look now at where Solomon got all of his wisdom from. We were just told that Solomon was the wisest of the wise, and the Book of Kings actually tells us the source of Solomon's wisdom. The first thing the Book of Kings tells us, it says, 1 Kings 3, Shlomo et Paro melech Mitzrayim veikach et bat Paro. Solomon allied himself by marriage with the Pharaoh of Egypt. He married Pharaoh's daughter. So it's an interesting point that the Book of Kings makes right here, that first and foremost, Solomon associates himself with Egypt. Now, there are many political reasons to associate oneself with Egypt that play into the Solomonic story. However, I want to suggest in this lecture that by associating himself with Egypt, Shlomo is plugging into Egyptian wisdom. Marrying somebody from Egypt means you're marrying into a culture, the culture that is known for its wisdom. So Shlomo was not only wise, but he sought wisdom, and he sought to be associated with people who are known for their wisdom, just like in the Western world, the Greeks were known for their wisdom. You could see how someone in the ancient world would want to marry somebody Greek because they're known for their wisdom, and we can imagine today different countries that have different cultural strengths. I know we have people on Zoom here who have backgrounds in England. We know that England is associated with high intellectual academic thoughts. So a similar alliance. Then we hear this other story. The king, King Solomon, very, very beginning of his reign, went to Gibeon. At Gibeon, God appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I grant you?" So Solomon goes to Gibeon, which was a place that God was known to appear. The king, Solomon, is looking for a revelation, I would suggest, and so he goes to a place where revelations take place. And God does appear to him, and God says, "What shall I grant you?" And Solomon said, "Grant then that your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad." That's what Solomon wishes for. He wishes to be a wise person. God gives him, so to speak, three wishes. And this is what Solomon asks for. Pleased that Solomon had asked for this, God said to him, "Because you asked for this, you did not ask for long life, you did not ask for riches, you did not ask for the life of your enemies." Generally, if somebody is given wishes, again, these are proverbial three wishes, you would ask for a long life, you would ask to be wealthy, you'd ask to be victorious. Those are the normal things, but instead, Solomon asks for wisdom, discernment in dispensing judges. I now do as you have spoken. So God says, "I grant your wish. I grant you a wise and discerning mind. There's never been anyone like you before, nor will anyone like you arise again." That's the source of the title of this lecture. "And I also grant you what you did not ask for, both riches and glory, all of your life, the likes of which the king has never had." You get a bonus since you asked for the right thing. You asked for wisdom. You also get the things you didn't ask for. You also get to be wealthy. You also get to be victorious. You get those things as well. "I will further grant you long life." And Solomon awoke. It was a dream, and he made a banquet for all of his courtiers to celebrate this. So I want to point out a few things from this passage. First and foremost, the interaction that we've been talking about since the first lecture between revelation and wisdom. Solomon goes to a place of revelation, but he asks not for further revelation, but he asks for wisdom, which we said in many ways runs parallel to revelation. Solomon could have asked for continuous revelation, but I think what Solomon does is he displays already his wisdom in knowing that the way that humans act is much more located in our own minds than through revelation. Solomon favors wisdom as the way to know how to act in this world. So again, we see the interaction between revelation and wisdom. Solomon favors wisdom and therefore becomes the most wise. I also want to point out to you in this passage, we have some other familiar themes that we've seen before that are associated with wisdom, right? In verse 9, right? Grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, right? That's wisdom as opposed to just content knowledge, to distinguish between good and bad. Elavin bein tov lara, obviously something that recalls something we talked about in the first lecture, which is the tree of knowledge itself. Okay, so you see here a reference back to the very source of human wisdom, the tree of knowledge, referenced in this. Okay, the other thing I'd like to point out to you, and this to me is the most amazing, reading through this passage, you notice things that remind us of another story that we looked at before. Take a look at the fact that God appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. So we have this idea of dreams, right? We have this idea of a discerning mind that we have never seen before. We have the idea of a king. We'd already mentioned Egypt. And take a look at the very end. Then Solomon awoke. It was a dream, and he made a banquet for his courtiers. Anyone want to come off Zoom, come off mute, and say what story this reminds us of? Who wakes?
Joseph.
Of course, right? These are clear intertextual references to the story of Joseph. Pharaoh is the other one who awoke and says it's a dream, who then made a banquet for his courtiers. The idea of the dream, the idea of Egypt, the idea of the king, clearly a reference back to Joseph, which is why I started there. I want you to notice this constellation of ideas and of stories. And this is why I suggest that there is a wisdom school that operates throughout the Tanakh, and it has a very set of ideas and terminology which you're now starting to recognize and see appear in the various wisdom texts. And so too, what follows is the story of Solomon and the two prostitutes, a very famous story which we're going to go through. And I'm going to suggest that this story also exactly parallels the Joseph story. And the story of the two prostitutes is going to look very much like the story that I started with of the butler and the baker. And the two, by the way, I've never seen anyone make this connection. To me, this is an obvious connection between the two. I want to show you how closely they are related, and maybe you'll pick up on some things that even I didn't. Here's how the story goes. Later, two prostitutes came to the king, that is Solomon, and stood before him. Again, similar to the Joseph story, we have two people who are coming for decision, coming for judgment, coming for wisdom, coming for insight. The first woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. On the third day after I was delivered, this woman also gave birth to a child. We were alone. There was no one else in the house, just the two of us in the house." Similar to the two people, we had the butler and the baker in the house of Pharaoh in the jail. Notice also the appearance of the 3 days, which also appeared in the story of the butler and the baker. The in 3 days, in 3 days, you will receive judgment. During the night, this woman's child died because she lay on it. She arose in the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant was asleep, and laid him in her bosom. And she laid her dead son in my bosom. So this plaintiff comes, and she said the two of us were in this house together, and this other woman who is the defendant, her her child, her son, died in the middle of the night, and this woman swapped her baby with my live baby, uh, and took my child and put it in my bosom, and she laid her dead son in my bosom, giving me the dead child. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, the woman says, there he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, it was not the son I had born. The other woman spoke up, the defendant, the accused. The other woman spoke up. No, the live one is my son and the dead one is yours. But the first insisted, no, the dead boy is yours, mine is the live one. And they went on arguing before the king. The king said, one says, this is my son, the live one, and the dead one is yours. And the other says, no, the dead boy is yours, mine is the live one. So the king gave the order, fetch me a sword. The sword was brought before the king, and the king said, cut the live child in two and give half to one and half to the other. But the woman whose child was the live one pleaded with the king, for she was overcome with compassion for her son. Please, my lord, she cried, give her the live child, only don't kill it. The other insisted, it shall be neither yours nor mine, cut it in two. Then the king spoke up. Give the live child to her, he said, and do not put it to death. She is the mother. When all Israel heard the decision that the king had rendered, they stood in awe of the king, for they saw that he possessed divine wisdom to execute judgment. I'm guessing that many, if not most of you, are familiar with this story and this famous Solomonic wisdom, saying that I'm going to kill the child as a way of smoking out the real mother, who would rather the child as a child live than be in possession of it, and how brilliant Solomon was in coming up with this. And of course, this shows us wisdom as judgment, wisdom as discernment. This again is not content knowledge. This is really using one's mind to solve a very sticky problem. What I want to suggest to you, however, um, is that Solomon's trick with the sword at the end was only the last part of the wisdom. And in fact, what Solomon did here was exactly what I suggested that Joseph did in the story of the butler and the baker. That Solomon actually pays close attention psychologically, using his emotional intelligence, his wisdom, to the two women in order to determine which is the mother. And I want to suggest that even before Solomon does the sword trick, he already figured it out. Many people are very bothered by this story and said, like, what if Solomon was wrong? That would have been terrible. I think he figured it out much earlier. And I think it's the same techniques that we saw in the very beginning that wise people use by looking at the actions and behavior of people. So, for instance, as I pointed to you with the story of Joseph, the first thing that Joseph paid attention to is who came forward first. Okay, because the person who's coming forward first, who's volunteering first, is instinctually the person who feels that they are in the right. They are eager to tell their story because they know that they are in the right. And so to here, the plaintiff goes goes first. Other things that I think Joseph picks up on. The plaintiff is the one who has associations with light. The plaintiff says, I arose in the morning. When I look closely in the morning, she's filled with this idea of light. She expresses light, just like we said, the butler had all these images of producing, of growing, of creating. right? All this positive imagery, which suggests somebody who is in the right and somebody who is innocent, whereas the defendant here uses images of darkness. The defendant in this scene, she says, "This happened during the night. I arose during the night." The defendant is associated with darkness. The plaintiff arises to nurse, to give life, right? The defendant arises to take the dead baby and put it in the other's bosom to give death. The plaintiff's child, by the way, is beside her. Okay, the defendant's child is in her bosom, exactly where a child would be if it was smothered, and puts the child in the bosom. Again, I don't want to dwell on this story overly. It's not our topic today, except to point out these unbelievable parallels with the Joseph story and how by using emotional intelligence, by paying attention to the world, by observing people's behaviors, we can make determinations about how to conduct ourselves, about what is right and what is wrong. And I believe those are the techniques that Joseph used back in Genesis, and that Solomon uses here in order to render judgment. I'd like to move on now to the book of Proverbs itself. This is the book of Solomon's proverbial, literally and figuratively, proverbial wisdom. And we see in the book of Proverbs, the book itself begins by identifying its author. Mishlei Shlomo ben David, Melech Yisrael, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And why did he write the book of Proverbs? It says, Ladat Chochma umusar, Lahavin Imrei Vina, for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment, for acquiring the discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity, for endowing the simple with shrewdness, the young with knowledge and foresight. And here you see several themes of wisdom that we have explored and a few that we haven't. First of all, the idea of success, that wisdom leads to success. And we know that the book of Job challenges that. But it is a predominant theme. We saw that last time in the Wisdom Psalms. We've seen that in the Joseph story. There is this theme that wisdom brings worldly success. And the book of Proverbs says, this is a book. If you follow this book, you will do well in life. As I said, there are different schools of thought within wisdom, but the book of Proverbs falls squarely into the idea that by being wise, by following the ways of wisdom, you will achieve worldly success. You will achieve material success. It is, however, also associated with ethics. The type of wisdom we're talking about is not, and if I want to make a contrast, it's not Machiavellian, right? This is not a shrewdness in the sense of circumnavigating ethics. Wisdom is deeply associated with ethical behavior, and the idea of behaving properly is going to go throughout the whole wisdom school. The other thing we see here as well is the idea of wisdom as something that the old impart to the young. The book of Proverbs is styled as a father speaking to his young son. Imagine somebody in his teenage years. By the way, we're going to see it doesn't necessarily have to be a father, it could be a mother, it doesn't necessarily have to be a son, it can be a daughter. It just happens to be the book of Proverbs is a father to a son. But the idea of intergenerational wisdom, the idea that wisdom is attained by living long. Wisdom is something that people acquire as they get older. And I've made this point several times in this lecture series of contrasting wisdom to philosophy. At the beginning of the Republic, Plato makes a distinction between philosophy, which actually can be attained by anyone. Anybody who's smart enough can be a philosopher. It's really uh, just how sharp your mind is. And wisdom, which is something that one gains simply by experiencing the world. And the old are naturally wiser than the young because they have lived longer. And this is a difference between philosophy and wisdom, and we should mark this distinction. Wisdom comes with age, and the book of Proverbs says, "Look, I've just lived longer than you, and you should take my advice because I just know more than you do." The second chapter of the book of Proverbs adds something which I'd like to share. B'ni im tikach amarai umitzvotai titzpon itach. My son, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments. I want to point out this idea, which again I've referred to before. The author of the book here, Solomon, calls his words mitzvot. We associate mitzvot with revelation, something given by God. I think it's important that Solomon uses mitzvah to mean his own wisdom. And it supports this idea that I've been building that wisdom is a path, is Torah that comes from us, that comes from ourselves, comes from humans through the divine gift of wisdom. And I think Solomon drives this point home by saying there are mitzvot from God, but there are mitzvot from me as well. Given that I have a mind, I can call what comes from my mind a mitzvah, and it contrasts this with revelation. Uh,
The,
when we think of
the word,
Proverbs,
the word titzpon is interesting, isn't it? Because it later means matspun, constant.
yes. Thank you. I just need a poet to point out these wonderful resonances. Thank you so much for that insight. Absolutely. When we think of Proverbs, just the English term, we think of uh, clever sayings, short, pithy pieces of advice, and indeed, the book of Proverbs contains many of these. Just short little aphorisms, thoughts, bomo that help guide us in life. However, at the same time, the book of Proverbs is much more than that. The book of Proverbs contains a lot of different genres of literature. We're going to take a look at a few of them today. It does contain these pithy little aphorisms, what we would in English call proverbs. They appear closer to the middle of the book and towards the end of the book. The first part of the book contains much more of sermonic literature, little discourses about wisdom, discourses, essays, poems about wisdom and its value. However, I want to jump to chapter 22 to take a look at Proverbs proper, what we would call Proverbs. And I invite you afterwards to go through the whole book of Proverbs. It doesn't have to be read cover to cover, like any type of wise sayings. You can pick out any of them and meditate upon them. So let's take a look here. This is from chapter 22, but again, there are many chapters that contain these types of proverbs. Divrei chachamim. Incline your ears and listen to the words of the wise, of the sages. Let your heart pay attention to my wisdom. Again, my wisdom. This is coming from my mind. It is good that you store them in your belly and that all of them be constantly on your lips. Solomon advises us to internalize wisdom. Wisdom is something that is both created inside us, in our minds, and is something that should be imbibed, literally in our stomachs, be part of us. And here are now some of these pieces of wisdom. First one, Al titra et bal'af. Do not associate with an angry man, angry person, or go about with one who is hot-tempered, lest you learn his ways and find yourself ensnared. Don't hang out with angry people. When you go through life, there are people who are just by their nature angry people. They might be very smart people. They might be very knowledgeable people, but it's not a good idea to hang out with angry people, what we call in Yiddish, right, verbisseners. This is not a good way of going through life. You will become part of that, and we all know this, right? This is a good thing to tell your kids, right? You're going to have different groups of friends. I tell my students all the time, be wary of who your friends are. If you hang around with people who are always verbissered, who are always angry, you too are going to become an angry person. Next, see a skilled man at his work. He shall attend upon kings. He shall not attend upon obscure men. Be good at what you do. I just read this piece of advice in a business book I read recently, advising people to become very skilled at one particular area of human need, right? Become really good at one thing, and you will rise through the ranks. If you become highly skilled at one job, you will rise through the ranks. And I love how universal this is, and how I can find this in a modern business book, and you could find this here in the book of Proverbs as well. Good business advice. Again, an older parent saying this to a young son, and of course, the reason why the old gives this to the young is because we don't have enough time in life to discover all of these things on our own. We need the people who have experienced life to be able to share this with us. Here's a fun one. When you sit down to dine with the ruler, consider well who is before you. Thrust a knife into your gullet if you have a large appetite. Do not crave for his dainties, for they are counterfeit food. So here's some advice by somebody who's a powerful person, Solomon, who's a king, and he advises his young son: if you ever get invited by a powerful person for a meal, be careful. The meal itself is a trap. Don't think that powerful people offering you a meal are doing it because they are being gracious. Okay, be very careful. Think who the person is, right? And don't be guided by your appetite. Don't like dig into the food, right? The food's there. They're watching you. They're watching how quickly you eat. They're watching how you eat. If you're really hungry, suppress your hunger. You can grab yourself a tuna fish sandwich later. Do not use this as an opportunity. Be careful. His food is fake food. This is not being offered. This is not like a friend or a spouse or a parent offering you, SS Mein Kind. This is not what it's about. Very wise advice from a ruler. Um, Something a little more common: do not toil to gain wealth. Have the sense to desist. Don't make your entire life about becoming wealthy. You see it, then it is gone. It grows wings and flies away like an eagle heavenward. You dedicate your whole life to making money. If you lose your money, you got nothing else. Make sure you have other things in your life other than money, because money can come and go. Make sure you have something else left when and if your money just disappears. More advice about food. Do not eat of a stingy man's food. Do not crave for his dainties. He is like one keeping account. Eat and drink, he says to you, but he does not really mean it. The morsel you eat, you will vomit. You will waste your courteous words. Be careful when eating with cheapskates. They're watching every single thing that you do. These are not generous people. We don't have time here, but if we ever meet in person, I can tell you personal stories where I learned this lesson the hard way myself. This is good advice. Be careful. And of course, when we're talking about food, we're talking about appetites. And a theme that goes throughout all of wisdom literature is discipline, musar. The word musar, we now use it in a general term to mean ethics, musar, right? But musar, philologically, the meaning of the word musar is discipline, being a disciplined person. And part of being disciplined is suppressing your appetites. And that is some of the best advice that's given throughout the wisdom literature. That older people, we know that young people are often voracious. They have great appetites for food, for sex, for money, and these are all a trap. And part of wisdom is teaching the young to suppress their appetite. Someone once said to me, all of Judaism can be summarized as delayed gratification. Uh, all of halacha and all of wisdom is really about controlling our appetites. And finally, another beautiful piece of wisdom. Boznik sil al tedaber. Don't speak to a dullard, an idiot. He will disdain your sensible words. Don't waste your time talking to dim people, to foolish people. You're just going to be going round and round in circles. We see this on social media all the time. We see this on the internet all the time. Very, very smart people who enter into endless conversation. It's as relevant today in the world of the internet and social media as it was thousands of years ago. All this wonderful wisdom. Um, in the uh, late 1800s, in the late 1800s, a man by the name of Sir Ernest Alfred Thompson Wallace Budge, who worked for the British Museum, was tasked with going to Egypt and discovering and purchasing Egyptian papyri and manuscripts for the British Museum. And in 1888, he's in Egypt on one of these scouting missions, looking at antiquities dealers, dealing with some not necessarily honest personalities, trying to acquire manuscripts, ancient manuscripts from ancient Egypt for the British Museum. And he finds, this is a picture of him, he finds this manuscript uh, in the possession of one of the antiquities dealers, and he brings it back to the British Museum, 1888. And it's identified as the wisdom of Amenemope, ancient Egyptian wisdom text, and it becomes very clear, very quickly, that the wisdom of Amenemope looks very much like parts of the book of Mishle, parts of Proverbs. Take a look here. The very first text I showed you, incline your ear and listen to the words of the sages. Let your heart pay attention to my wisdom. It is good that you store them in your belly and that they be constantly on your lips. Look at how the wisdom of Amenemope begins. Incline your ear and listen to what I say, and let your heart apprehend. It is good for you to place them in your heart. Let them rest in the casket of your belly. Same imagery, that they may act as a peg upon your tongue instead of lips, but very similar. Not only that, if you take a look throughout this manuscript, you'll see over and over again the same or very similar proverbs. The one I showed you about not hanging out with people who are hot-tempered. Same thing in the Egyptian manuscript. Do not associate with a man of passionate anger, nor approach him for conversation. The proverb I showed you, when you sit down to dine with the ruler, consider well who is before you. Same thing, chapter 23 of Amenemope. Eat not bread in the presence of a ruler. Look upon the dish that is before you, and let that alone supply your need. Do not toil to gain wealth. Have the sense to desist. Same thing. Amenemope, toil not after riches. They have made themselves wings like geese. Uh, Same imagery, like an eagle heavenward. And since the late 1800s and early 1900s, when the book of Proverbs is studied, it is often studied in light of this Egyptian wisdom, and the parallels are absolutely amazing. Why is this important? So, first of all, the importance is, as I showed you in the beginning, that Solomon associated with Egypt as a place of wisdom, and clearly he brought over much of Egyptian wisdom to Israel, and published a lot of this in the book of Proverbs. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with this. One of the beauties of wisdom that I showed you earlier is its universal appeal. Wisdom is something that, while it can be Jewish, does not have to be Jewish. There is wisdom that belongs to the human condition. That's why the tree of knowledge was given to all of humanity, not specifically to the Jewish people. And we have no problem including this type of wisdom. It is something that the world can offer us, and we can offer the world. And it is, as I said, something that feels very contemporary about the wisdom literature as opposed to other parts of Tanakh. There's some parts of Tanakh that are very much about us, that are very much about the Jewish people and our unique mission, our unique situation in history. Not so wisdom. Wisdom is something that we can offer the world can offer us, and this connection between the two, I think, is quite amazing, quite beautiful, and it's quite a remarkable thing that we have discovered this manuscript and found so much of our wisdom.
Why can't you say that the Egyptian wife got it from Solomon and presented it to her people?
Right, because this is older. Is the most straightforward forward answer, but without question, things move back and forward, and I imagine Egyptians got things from us as well. But this particular text is older. And by the way, it's the other possibility too is that there were other sources that both the Egyptians and Shlomo drew from as well. There's nothing wrong with that as well. I'm arguing for cross-pollination. And not everything is derivative, but some of it moved from place to place. But that's an excellent point. Okay. I told you that the beginning of the book of Proverbs contains a few little essays, poems about wisdom. I want to share this one with you because it introduces a wonderful idea that we see in Proverbs of wisdom being personified. In the book of Proverbs, we have wisdom who is literally personified, wisdom as a person. And this is how it's described. Chochmot bachutz tarona. Wisdom cries aloud in the streets, raises her voice in the square. So wisdom, if you could imagine wisdom as a person, as an individual, imagine wisdom crying out. At the heads of the busy streets, she calls. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she speaks out. I want to point out to you here, this is a question somebody asked, I think, in the first lecture. About wisdom as an esoteric versus an exoteric idea. Is wisdom something that is kept among certain people, wise people, or is wisdom something that is open to everyone? Here in Mishnah, in the book of Proverbs, the fact that wisdom is out in the streets suggests that wisdom is exoteric. Wisdom is for everyone. This is not something that we hold close to the vest. This is something that we share, that many people can have access to. Everyone can benefit from. And here we have a further idea. What does wisdom say when she's crying out? You who spurned my advice, who would not hear my rebuke, I will laugh at your calamity and mock when terror comes upon you. Wisdom has a bit of an edge as a personality. She says she's going to laugh at you. Then they shall call me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me, but not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose fear of the Lord. Wisdom says, watch out. Listen to me now, because at some point it's going to be too late. And again, we can see this as the older, wiser people saying to the younger generation. I know I say this to my kids all the time, say it to my students. Let me tell you, make good decisions now when you're young, because at a certain point, it's going to be too late. That's why the old advise the young. You need to hear it now, because if you make bad decisions when you're young, it's going to be too late. And again, this theme that has come up in every single lecture, right? And again, this is why I always say wisdom as a religious enterprise, not like philosophy, right? Virat Hashem lo bacharu, right? The fear of the Lord. Wisdom is always associated with the fear of God. And now I think the most wonderful thing about this passage, anyone pick up? When wisdom is personified as a woman. This is a fascinating thing. Wisdom, I don't know if any of you picked up on this at first, but wisdom is personified as a woman. And in fact, not only is wisdom personified as a woman, but when you think about it, and again, these are universal concepts, liberty, justice, right? Also personified as women. This is a source of absolute fascination, and this is cross-cultural. Jewish culture, non-Jewish culture, Western culture, Eastern culture, and when we take a look, and it's not the topic today, but sort of the place of women in Judaism and the place of women in religion, it should be pointed out, and this is not apologetics at all, when it comes to the mind, we associate things with the mind with women. Men, in general, in ancient literature and certainly in the Bible, are associated with brawn, with physicality. When we're talking about things associated with the mind, they are often and disproportionately associated with women. Lady Liberty, Lady Justice, and here in the Tanakh, Lady Wisdom. Because wisdom abides in the mind, women are as wise as men. Wisdom is not something that is associated with one sex or the other. And if we had to think of a particular sex, we would say women, because in the ancient world, men went out to fight to use their bodies, and women were much more associated with thinking and with the more subtle parts of the human condition. And here you have it in the beginning of Proverbs. Here's a beautiful saying that we see a lot in Jewish literature. Shma b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh torat imecha. My son, heed the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the Torah. Again, Torah in the sense of wisdom, the instruction of your mother. You see, men and women are put here on equal footing when it comes to imparting wisdom, and it is therefore not surprising that the book of wisdom, the book of Proverbs, ends with Eshet Chayil. The very final chapter of the book of Proverbs is about an Eshet Chayil, a great woman. I love the old translation, a woman of valor. And it's not by accident. It's not by accident. Women are deeply associated with wisdom, and it is perfectly appropriate that the Book of Wisdom ends with an ode to the wise woman. I imagine we're all somewhat familiar with this as the blessing that the husband gives to his wife at Friday night. I just want to point out a few things. We're not going to go through the entire chapter, but a few things that resonate with the other lectures we've given. Notice here, verse 20, I bolded it. She gives generously to the poor. Her hands are stretched out to the needy. This idea of generosity, ethics being part of of wisdom. Again, we have here in bold in verse 26, her mouth opens with wisdom, her tongue with kindly teaching. Wisdom is associated with a good disposition. Right? And finally, at the end, Isha Yirat Hashem, a woman who fears the Lord. We keep coming back to the same idea that wisdom, although it is a specifically human enterprise, always begins with God, with Yirat Hashem. The last thing that I want to show you here, though, is something that escapes notice often in this passage. What type of woman are we talking about? Let's take a look here. It says she's verse 15 talks about the daily fare of her maids. It talks about her buying up land, sets her mind on an estate and acquires it. In verse 21, also underlined, her whole household is dressed in crimson. Verse 22, her clothing is linen and purple. What type of woman are we talking about here?
Royalty.
Wealthy. Yes, we are talking about the wealthy. Purple, crimson, these are colors that only the wealthy could afford. We're talking about estates. We're talking about the landed gentry here. So although wisdom is not associated with one sex or another, wisdom is quite egalitarian in terms of the sexes, in terms of different genders. At the same time, wisdom seems to be associated with wealth. And this indeed is a predominant theme in the book of Ecclesiastes, to which we will turn next time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. In a paper that I published in Judaism, I showed that the division of the baby in the dream of Solomon echoes the prohibition of dividing the kingdom of Israel into two parts.
Oh, that's excellent. Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. Please send that to me. That's fantastic.
I'll do that, but also your wonderful Dvar Torah made me aware that Reuven's suggestion to Yaakov that he kill one of his two sons is also relevant to your Chiddush. Don't kill, no killing of one of Reuven's sons, just as no killing of the prostitute's baby.
Oh, very nice. Very, very nice. I always get chidushim from you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Let me just take a look in the chat. I see a comment from Renee. It seems Solomon's wisdom and his subsequent deviations from God raise questions about the relationship between wisdom and piety. Is wisdom enough, or must it be combined with faithful adherence to God's commandments? How does sage reconcile Solomon's unmatched wisdom with his later transgressions, such as his many wives and wealth? Was this wisdom purely intellectual, or did it have a spiritual aspect? Wow, this is a loaded question. This is fantastic. So, as we said earlier, wisdom cannot be separated from piety. This is not Machiavelli. This is not this idea of being smart enough to get around ethics. Wisdom and piety are deeply, deeply associated. By the way, this is something that Rambam emphasizes as well when he talks about philosophy. We cannot separate wisdom from faith. Now, where does Solomon fall down? I think, like all of us, I can certainly speak to myself. For myself, I think Solomon falls down when he doesn't follow his own advice. We saw in the book of Proverbs that Solomon advises against dedicating our lives to too much wealth. We know that the Torah tells kings, right, in the book of Devarim, right, not to have too many wives. So I think it is when Solomon specifically does not follow his own advice, and it's one thing to have wisdom, and it's another thing to follow your own wisdom. We all know very many wise and smart people who make very, very bad decisions and very, very bad mistakes. We are all human. And although we might know what the right thing is to do, that doesn't mean that we always do the right thing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be with all of
Rabbi.
you.
It's a lot
Thank
to
you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Grossman.
yes, much to ponder. Thank you.
My pleasure. We'll look forward to seeing you next week for Kohelet.
Thank
Call
you.
too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you again.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. My pleasure.